Cool. All right. So welcome everybody. This is week one. So we just did introductions within the live class. I'll talk very briefly about myself because we have a bunch of material to cover today. But yeah, this is going to be really fun. I'm really excited about having both a live portion and an async portion. We'll kind of see how it goes. I feel like every class I end up trying something different, and sometimes they fail miserably and sometimes they go well. So I'm hoping that this is a good session. I hope for everyone else it is as well. So we'll have to see. Cool. I'm going to just share my screen and walk through some of the slides. So today's gonna be a little bit of a light intro into both the course as well as Comfy. We'll basically rebuild the default ComfyUI node system, and we'll talk about why those are the most important things to learn about, and then we'll go from there. All right, cool. Move some things around here so I can see everybody. And yeah, for folks in the live session, please just shout out and stop me if you have any questions. So we went through and did intros already for this group. There's also our Slack channel. So if you don't mind introducing yourself there as well, just that way when people are hitting you up or asking questions or having some strong debate, that they at least know who you are. I usually give a 15, 20-minute talk about myself, but I kind of don't think we have time for that today. So instead, what I did is in our syllabus, and I'll mention this in a minute, I added about a 30 to 45-minute lecture that I did a couple weeks ago for a group in Bournemouth. That was about maybe more my film work, but also touches a lot on my experimental AI practice as well. So it's both here in the slides and also linked out in the syllabus. So if you want to check that out, you'll learn a little bit more about me. But I've been doing AI stuff for 7 or 8 years now and teaching for about 5. And like many of you, I kind of I knew what Comfy was. I sort of saw it and I was like, I don't really need a node-based tool if I've got a code editor and that sort of thing. Why do I want to mess with this? And then I saw more and more people building cool Comfy workflows. And I was like, okay, there's something up here. People are learning to use this in a different way than we're using other tools. And then I started playing with it myself. And I was like, oh, this is actually really cool because you can do stuff out of the box using the basic nodes that are really, really, really hard to do, even with a diffusers library. So we'll take a look at that, maybe not this week, but starting in the next couple weeks, we'll start to build on and see how just some of the way you can prompt stuff inside these tools is different than you can do out of the box with their prompting tools. And that alone makes it more valuable than some other things that are out there. But then you can sort of build on the masking and video and all these other cool things. So there's a lot of really cool stuff to play with that I'm really excited to start to dig into with everyone over the next couple weeks. I have a loose schedule. This is kind of updated from the class that everyone signed up for. This week's gonna be kind of basics. We'll just talk about Comfy as a UI. We'll rebuild the workflow. And then over the next weeks, we're gonna sort of build up more and more. So we'll talk about the model pipeline. We'll look at LoRa's. I assume people might know what those are, but we'll talk about those in more detail next week. We'll talk about the conditioning chain, which is basically text prompting and some other things. And then we'll just kind of add to our array of nodes as we build things up. So we'll look at IP adapters, we'll look at control nets, and then we'll jump into animation. And right now, most people are using Animate Diff, but there are some other tools out there as well. So, and I always like to leave the last week for maybe overflow, brand new stuff that just came out. I think everyone's playing with, what is it called? Live control this week, which is face morphing. You can sort of you can guide a single face with your face. There's all sorts of cool things going on. So I'm sure this will be changed. If not next week, then in very soon in the next couple weeks as new things come out. Golan and I were already talking about there's some cool stuff that integrates either processing P5 or GLSL. There's a lot of stuff that's just beginning to explode within this ecosystem. And if we don't get to it in this class, I will definitely record secondary videos that I'll share with people to sort of expand upon. This is sort of an intro class. And I want to keep it somewhat intro-y, but there's also so much cool stuff that it's worth sort of sharing when I can. So structure for the folks here, this is live material, and we'll have a 2-hour live class every week. That recording will go out to everybody as well as the async folks. And then I have already some secondary recordings I'm going to share with people. So I know I sent everyone a link to sort of my 30-minute breakdown of how Stable Diffusion works. If you didn't get to watch that, no worries. We'll touch on a little bit of it as well. And I also recorded some videos on how to upload models directly to RunComfy and how to use the ComfyUI manager, which we'll talk a little bit more about as well. So there's already a couple more recordings in addition to this session. I always see the recordings as sort of optional things. They're not things I would expect people to know as we go week to week. But if you are interested in sort of understanding everything about ComfyUI, then those recordings can help sort of expand on your learning. There is a Google Doc. If you're not a Slack person, totally fine. I like to use Slack because there is a nice way to have some conversations, people share their work, that sort of thing. But if that's not for you, then what you'll really want to just focus on is this Google Doc. And every week I will add to this. I'll sort of list out sort of exactly like all the recordings and all the slides that we have for the week. I'll sort of say like, hey, here's the kind of homework I think you should do this week. If you want to, homework's obviously optional. This isn't a graded class or anything. But if you want to get the most out of this class, I recommend sort of spending an hour or two just working on the homework every week. So this will get updated pretty much every week after these sessions once I have this recording updated. But I'll kind of start filling it out already as things go. So this is probably the page to bookmark if you just want to know like what's the central location for everything I want to look at. And I have as an archive, it's safer to put this on Google Docs and it is on my Slack channel, which is a free Slack. So like after 90 days, it's like impossible, or I have to pay like $1 million to get it out of Slack. So this is sort of the archival thing and what you should bookmark. And that's linked to from here. I will also add it to our Slack channel. Actually, let me just share it now and drop it in our chat. So if anyone wants it now, they can have it. Where did my chat go? There you go, cool. All right, so there's also for this live group, we also have a Q&A that's set up also weekly. I'm gonna start with it on Thursdays. If no one can make those times, then we'll move it around. But I find that's like a good, like sort of middle time between this. You've got a couple days to play, a couple days for Q&A, and then a couple days to play again. You're also more than welcome to hit me up on Slack, both live group and async group. Just give me like 24 hours before you start bugging me again for a response. Just because I do have other things going on right now, although this is largely most of my focus. And then we have that Slack channel, which is mostly for discussions, people asking questions. And then obviously because we're making images, I would love to have like a weekly, just like share what you've been making. You know, hey, I learned that this thing works this way, or I learned that I don't understand how this thing works. Can someone explain this to me? That sort of thing. So every week I will make a little thread in Slack. If you can try to use the thread, that's helpful. Otherwise, we get a really jammed up, messy Slack channel. So if I yell at you and just say like, hey, can you drop that in the Slack channel or the thread? I'm not yelling at you. I'm just saying like, I would like to sort of keep these cleaned up a little bit if I can. So main class objectives, obviously like everyone's here to learn ComfyUI, right? Like, so we're gonna mostly just play in ComfyUI and we're gonna play with all the different features, all the different tools. But kind of as like, my main purpose for this is also to teach people how Stable Diffusion works. To get the most out of Comfy, you actually need to understand how stable works. And if you don't understand how stable works, then like you're just kind of button mashing. You might download someone else's workflow and be like, I have no idea how this works. It works for me half the time, and the other half the time I get crap or I can't get it to work at all. So my goal is really to like, because Comfy is changing all the time, is to get you to understand the inner workings or under the baseline of how it works. So then as new things come out, you're kind of like, oh, I'm just bolting this on top of the model tool chain. Or, oh, this gets added here into conditioning and I know how conditioning works, that sort of thing. So most of this is really going to be us, like we'll talk a little bit about theory and then we'll see it in practice. And the big thing that I want people to also understand is like, Comfy is this massive ecosystem. It's like growing every day. There's new nodes and new people playing with it. And that creates this really cool flexibility that allows you to basically work in any way you want to. But the biggest downside I found with Comfy is just how poorly documented it is because it moves so fast, as well as, you know, everyone works in a slightly different way. So the flexibility of Comfy is really great, but it also means that like you could download someone's workflow and look at it and be like, I have no idea what's going on in this thing. It's a bit like Touch Designer in that way, right? Where Touch Designer, like people will embed like little, you know, workflows inside of workflows inside of workflows. And it's like, you got little turduckens of things you're trying to unpack them when you see their work. And Comfy is very much the same way. Comfy is also, because it's open source, has like a terrible naming convention across all its tools. There'll be 10 nodes all named the exact same thing and you'll have no idea which one to use. It still happens to me every day, so I'm happy to help where I can with that. So Comfy's really cool and really powerful, but it's really hard to get started in without just the basics. So hopefully over the next 7 weeks, we'll sort of build our way up and learn these things. So I assume by now everyone has at least seen what a ComfyUI looks like. If not, then today will be your first introduction to it. ComfyUI is a GUI meaning a graphical interface that sits atop a pipeline. Again, maybe you have to define all these things. It basically is a set of tools that are largely based on Stable Diffusion, although that's been changing quite a lot over the past couple months or years even. I think Comfy started about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. I know people were talking about it then. And now it's reached a pretty sort of mass level where people are using it to not even use Stable Diffusion models. I'll talk about like the interaction between these things in just a minute. The creator, as of like a month ago, worked at Stability, but actually left very recently. And now there's a group called ComfyUI that is sort of most of the big maintainers of different Comfy pieces have come together to kind of create a conglomerate. Still keeping it open source. They're not going to charge for Comfy at any point, but they've sort of said that they plan to sort of make it more like a Red Hat kind of thing where they'll do consulting for bigger groups and that sort of thing. But they're now going to work on Comfy full time. Mr. ComfyUI, who is, I think he goes by Comfy Anonymous, was working at Stability, but did leave. And he was actually working on a bunch of model training. So now he's fully focused on ComfyUI, which is pretty great. But I'll also say that they're still very connected to that world as well as the other sort of image generation world. And they tend to get stuff released like the day it comes out. So there's actually a brand new model that came out very recently called Auraflow. And I think it came out 3 days ago. And the day it was released, Comfy had nodes that worked for it and a set of sort of other tools that worked for it. So it's a very fast-paced environment to the point of where some node creators will also rewrite their entire node code base and break everything, which if you're familiar with IP Adapter is what happened with IP Adapter about 3 months ago. So again, it also moves fast and they break a bunch of shit and then we're all stuck trying to figure out what the hell happened. It's kind of the joy and the challenge of these tools. So a question I got a bunch at ITP Camp was, how does Stability and Comfy relate to each other? And that's a kind of tricky question without like really understanding Comfy as a whole. But the way I would best describe it is Stability.ai, which is the company that sort of created Stable Diffusion, creates a bunch of models. And they have their own GUI tools. They have a thing called, I think it's called Dream Machine, that you can use on their website. But the main core thing that Stability does for this community is they build all these models. So you might have heard of Stable Diffusion 1.5, Stable Diffusion 2, Stable Diffusion XL, Stable Video Diffusion, Stable Diffusion 3, which is the latest thing they just put out. Those are all models trained and built by the company at Stability AI. But they're not really affiliated with Comfy in any way. Comfy is sort of its own open source project that uses those tools. And Comfy really kind of oversees, from my perspective, a couple key things. One is they maintain this interface. They maintain this sort of node-based interface. The other thing is they have the tooling that allows you to take a model, which is just a bunch of code or a bunch of numbers, essentially, and turn those into images. Now, Stability has their own version of that as well, but Comfy just happens to maintain the main diffusion image generator. They also do a lot with third-party node management, which we won't get into this week, but we probably will next week. That's probably their biggest thing. Because they're an open source team, they have an open source adoption system where anyone can submit a node, or you can download nodes that are not officially recognized through Comfy, either through their management tool or through your own uploads. But they sort of manage the APIs that are utilized there. And then there is a community management side of this as well. They have built up a community within Discord and other places where they sort of help manage that community. I think it's important to mention because if you're familiar at all with sort of the AI world, there's a lot of discord or heat about what's happening at Stability right now. Lots of people think Stability is going to go under, or it's going to get bought by someone else, and then they're going to change the whole model. The release of Stable Diffusion 3 introduced a bunch of licensing issues that people are upset about. So there's a question when I talk to people, they're like, "Oh, is Comfy going to go away when Stable goes away?" And the reality is that Comfy today does not really worry about that because they also have a bunch of other open source models that they're working off of. So all the control nets, IP adapter, animate diff stuff, you don't need to know what this means. We're going to go through it in the next couple weeks. But all those models are not made by Stability. They're made by third parties. And those are also open source tools, and those are all integrated into Comfy. So if Stability went away tomorrow, all the models would still work today, and there would probably be a new open source group that would be releasing new models, and Comfy would still exist as it is as well. So there's kind of this like really chaotic ecosystem. But the interesting thing is Comfy doesn't really rely on any of these individuals to sort of survive. Although I do think they're probably still making money through Stability, or Stability is probably paying them on some level to support things. But yeah, the ecosystem is pretty crazy. But all we need to worry about is that Comfy exists. They've now built up a little like sort of nonprofit kind of group to sort of keep supporting the tools as it grows more and more. So Comfy is a node editor. If you've ever used a tool like Touch Designer, it's basically like Touch Designer, except Touch Designer, every one of those nodes or one of those blocks has been made by Touch Designer. I don't think they have some third parties, but it's mostly all made by Derivative, the group that makes Touch Designer. Whereas Comfy is largely actually made by people outside of the Comfy org group. And that can lead to some of the chaos here. But it's also really important because then you get lots of features or lots of ideas that you can then use. You can make your own custom nodes. We're not going to do that in this class. That's way beyond my skill level, but you can make your own custom nodes as well. And they have some documentation around that, although I've heard it's hit or miss. When you put a bunch of these nodes together into a system, like say, I want to be able to prompt with a piece of text and get an image out, the whole chain of how that all works is what we call a workflow. And the other really cool thing about Comfy is those workflows can basically be saved to a file, and then you can share that with someone else and they can open it. And they have to do with some installation of some third-party nodes or models and that sort of thing. But you can then easily sort of integrate your own workflow using someone else's. So again, there's sort of this great open source sort of sharing and being able to utilize each other's pieces of things. And that's led to some issues in the community because they're also, startups that are taking those without giving any credit back to their makers. So like any open source community, there's also some infighting about who makes what and who owns what and who gets credit for what. But overall, I would say like it's really like a fun community where people do share a lot of stuff. We'll tell you how they make stuff, and you can even see their workflows and go from there. This is what we're going to build today. This is what's called the default ComfyUI workflow. This is a basic text to image workflow. But we will rebuild it from scratch. The key to know is like any of these gray blocks are sort of what we call a node. And then you've got sort of the spaghetti strings that have to connect everything. And the nice part about sort of understanding what you can connect and not connect within Comfy is they're all color coded. So on the left side of any node is your inputs, and on the right side of any node is your outputs. And a color from an input has to connect to a color from an output. So yellow to yellow, purple to purple, red to red, pink to pink. And we'll talk about most of these, what I sort of call like flows today, and then we'll build up on them and expand on them as we go through class. But anytime you open Comfy for the very first time, you're going to see this. You'll get kind of sick of seeing this actually. But we'll talk about why each one of these pieces is really important to our first sort of image generation tool as we go through class today. So a little recap on the positives and negatives or the pros and cons of ComfyUI. So it is open source. I think open source is great, especially for stuff that moves so quickly. If this were a closed source team, they'd have to be quite large in order to make all this happen. I love being able to see Sarah and Claire pass stuff to each other like over this. You can actually see it across the camera. Sorry. The other thing I think is nice is this is really the first tool that I would say is like a GUI that is expressive. There are a lot of GUI tools for image generation, or even something like ChatGPT that can generate images. The problem with those is that they tend to be very, very limited. Most people, when they make a GUI tool for text to image, you get one text box, maybe a couple selectors, and then you get an image output. So this is kind of like a one level of abstraction further down the pipeline, but allows for a lot more expressiveness than those other tools do. So if you use Midjourney, Midjourney, like literally you just have a Discord bot you talk to. And you might be able to remember some of the key parameters you can pass in, that sort of thing. But in this case, you can kind of build your own parameterized system. And that's really cool and it's really powerful, but it does have some downsides, which we'll talk to about in a second. Other cool thing is there are lots of extensions for these tools. Like there's, we've been talking about, there's a P5 one now, there's a GLSL one that's coming out soon. There are lots of ways to build this into your own practice. There's also audio nodes now, using both the stability audio tools as well as other things. A lot of video nodes now. There's just like a big ecosystem. So whatever your practice is, you can likely find a way to integrate that into this in a really cool way. The fact you can share and say workflows is really huge. I think they need to improve that system a little bit, but they're getting better on it with it. But especially being able to send a friend like a JSON file, you can then open in your own version of Comfy and add to it or remix it and then send it back is really cool. And I say this hesitantly with an asterisk, it does technically run on any computer. So you can run this on a Mac today. Your image generation will be quite slow on a Mac, meaning it's going to take like 10 minutes to generate an image. So then it's basically impossible for video, right? It would take like 2 hours to generate a video. But it is feasible. You could do it, and there are people who do it because they need to use their Mac and they don't want to pay for anything else. So it's possible. It's just going to be really, really slow. But if you have an NVIDIA card, we'll talk about this when we talk about installing in just a minute. If you have an NVIDIA graphics card, like on a Windows or a Linux, then you're pretty much golden. Like you can really do a lot with that. There are some limits, especially when you hit video or especially when you begin to build really complex workflows, but there are often ways around that as well, whether it's just reducing the image size, whether it's sort of offloading some of your tools and then bringing them back in, that sort of thing. Downsides of Comfy and why I think many of you are practicing this class is it's hard to get started. It's easy to sort of look at the default workflow and play with it a little bit, but it's hard then to build up to your next step or to open up someone's workflow and understand what's going on. So hopefully this class will help solve that one. The documentation for all this stuff is really poor. Just, I'll be completely honest, like really poor documentation. If any of you are great technical documenters, like you can do the community a huge favor by starting to document some of this stuff. And hopefully these videos and recordings and that sort of thing will also help with some of that. There are a couple really good folks who are doing a good job of, mostly through YouTube, sort of explaining different parts of things. But I always find YouTube is not the same as like a nice dedicated technical doc. So look at some of that. The extension ecosystem is great, but also a nightmare. As I mentioned, there are nodes that have nearly the exact same names, and with nearly the exact same functionality with slight differences. And if you download those and try to import them, you're gonna like run into issues. It's a mess. It doesn't really work well on Macs. Like you can say like, yes, you can use a Mac for this, but it's really not good enough right now. Even with the M4 chips that are supposed to be better for AI work, I would still say it's not great for this. And lastly, I mentioned this in my ITP class, in my ITP camp a month ago, and people started freaking out. There are some security issues with this. About a month ago, someone put up a node that had this really cool sounding idea, and all it did was like use ChatGPT behind the scenes to scrape your credentials. So people were getting hacked. And the group that put it out said it was like, because we fucking hate AI artists, they steal from us, so we're going to steal back from them, like all this stuff. And yes, Golan, you also mentioned Civitai, which I will bring up today as well. That's sort of outside of Comfy's problem, but it is a problem with the Stable Diffusion ecosystem as well. And I will definitely talk about that as well. All that to say, Comfy was very quick to find the problem with the security issue with that one node. It's now since been removed. And Comfy's like one of their top priorities now is security on the system. So, don't go downloading any node and then throwing it into your system. Like do a little bit of research beforehand. But I will say Comfy has been on top of it and is moving quickly to try to solve some of those issues. But it was a cool art project unless your shit got hacked, I guess is what I'm saying. So you just have to be kind of wary about downloading workflows and running them. Another great reason to use it and do it in the cloud is if you do it in the cloud, then you're dealing with other people's security and not your own. So just something to keep in mind, but that is less and less of an issue. But I bring it up just because, it's open source tech and people sometimes don't think about that before they install stuff. So we'll quickly touch on installing ComfyUI. I sent everyone a note, which is basically, if you're on a Mac, don't do it. You can try it. There are installation instructions on the ComfyUI GitHub page on installing for Macs. I have heard from various people that it is hit or miss whether or not it actually works. So my recommendation will be to not do it if you're on a Mac computer. If you're on a PC or Linux and you have an NVIDIA GPU card, you honestly should install it and like work off it that way. But that's not everybody. And also I'd say like you need a GPU that has like at least 12 gigabytes of VRAM, which again means you're spending $2,000 on a GPU. So most people don't have that. If you do, great. If you've done video work in the past, you might have something that works for that. But you can do that. I have also heard that AMD cards are semi-supported But you'll have, again, sort of the same issue as Max, which is that your image generation will be slow and your video generation will be like a crawl. So we can play with it. I've also, I have to say, I have a Linux machine. Happy to help people set up stuff on Linux. I do not have a PC. So if you're on Windows and you want help, I'm happy to try to help you, but I might not be able to. But I've done a lot with Linux. I'm happy to like help anyone who wants help with that. That might be a great lesson for like a Q&A session. So if you want to do that, let's talk during then. What I would say is installing Comfy, there are the official instructions on the ComfyUI site that you can follow. A lot of people also use a tool called Pinocchio. Pinocchio is sort of it's like a standalone installer that's meant just for a bunch of AI tools. So you can install Auto 1111, you can install Focus, you can install Comfy with it. I've tried it. I kind of hate it. It's not really a tool for me. I'm much more of like a GitHub person. But if you are not a GitHub person, you might find good use in Pinocchio. You kind of install like its own little app, and then you got to open the app, and then you got to go and sub-install stuff. So I'm happy to help with people if they want to try that. I would say first and foremost, try with the ComfyUI official instructions. Like I have no problem using those. They tend to work pretty well. One last thing is if you install ComfyUI locally, you also want to install what's called the Comfy Manager. I have no idea why these are not basically like pre-installed with ComfyUI today. Maybe with the new creation of Comfy.org, they will do this. Comfy Manager allows you to easily install models as well as third-party nodes. And that's sort of a must-have. Like, honestly, I don't know anyone that uses ComfyUI without using Comfy Manager. They're kind of like a bread and butter. They must go together. So if you're going to do a local install, make sure you install that as well. Pretty easy to install. The installation instructions are on Comfy Manager. Oh, and then I've got, this is one of the videos. I won't really cover this today, but it's linked to in the syllabus. This goes over how to use Comfy Manager, as well as how to install a helpful plugin that I find that I use a lot called Sidebar. You might see it in when we go to our demo stuff today. But if you want to watch this after the fact and sort of maybe install your own version, that will be helpful as well. But this just kind of goes over a brief overview of Manager. We won't do a lot with Manager today. And in fact, if you're using RunComfy, we won't need to use Manager a lot because it comes pre-installed with everything. I'll talk about that in a minute. But if you are doing a local install, you might need to install some stuff with Comfy Manager. And we won't today, but probably in the future, I'll have some sessions for folks like that on what you install before we do each week of material. So there we go. Okay, so what I'm actually recommending most of us use today is a tool called RunComfy. It's on runcomfy.com. The reason I think it's the best thing to use right now is, first and foremost, it comes with pretty much every node we're going to need in this class pre-installed, and it comes with something like 15 different models already installed as well. And honestly, if I had to do that in this class, that would be its own 2-hour session of installing everything. So if you want to go local, like you're more than welcome to, but you're going to spend a lot of time installing all the right custom nodes and all the right models. And I'm happy to help walk people through that if they want to. But it is a headache. It is a lot of setup up front. And RunComfy you don't need to do that at all. So it saves you a couple hours of time. Now there is a price to RunComfy. RunComfy generally costs about $1 to $1.50 an hour, which I know sounds like a lot, and it kind of is a lot. But you get pretty decent GPUs with it, as well as not having to install all that crap means it saves you a lot of time as well. So it kind of saves you some money as well. And then there are some predefined workflows you can get directly through RunComfy. A lot of them are locked behind this pro plan they have. The pro plan is $30 a month. I don't think anyone really needs it. It basically reduces your cost of your hourly costs. I think it's like a 20% cut on hourly GPU time. But I don't know if it's worth it. I mean, if you're going to use it every day, maybe it's worth it in that way. But if you're going to use it every day, you might want to start to think about investing in like a local system to set up. But in general, I just think it's a much easier way to work, especially for a class like this where we don't want to spend all our time just installing stuff. We want to actually play with things. I would generally recommend it. So if you haven't already set up an account, go to runcomfy.com. I think you can just connect your Google account or a GitHub account maybe, and you can get started that way. So, I would put maybe $50 of credits in, and that would probably be enough for this class, unless you're going to spend a lot of time generating stuff. They do offer, I think it's now 15 minutes of free credits at first. So you could probably go with today without paying, but then next week you're going to want to pay anyway. So again, that's a little bit of an added cost to this. If that's a problem for anyone, just let me know. We can maybe figure out something. But the problem is you really do need to have that local system of RunComfy. I know there are other tools that people like to use. So if you're a fan of Colab, there's a Colab notebook you can run Comfy off of. It's a little hit or miss in some of the third-party installations. There are other tools. I know I think someone said they use Run Diffusion or Think Diffusion. There are ways to run Comfy off that. The problem with all those is that they don't come pre-installed with stuff, so you're going to spend a little bit of time installing things. And that just is kind of the burden you bear of trying to go local. So in general, I'm going to say like it's worth the money to pay for RunComfy. But if you want to go the extra mile and do something local or whatever, like you're more than welcome to it. And I'm happy to help with that setup. So I'm just going to go ahead and click over here and just to show you what RunComfy looks like. So you'll come in here, you'll just hit sign in. I assume it already knows that I'm there. Yep, cool. It already knows I'm there. So you'll see here, we'll get into some of this as we get further along in the weeks of class, but there are a bunch of workflows that are already available to you. Anything that's tagged as pro means you have to pay for it. Or I hope no one from RunComfy is listening to this, but like, I think I could just download the workflow for you and send it to you. So like, cause I pay for it, why not? So you see one you like, let me know and I can send you something from that. But there are some free ones as well. So like, I was just talking about this. There's this new thing called Live Portrait, which allows you to take a single image and then you control it with your face and it kind of matches the poses. It's pretty crazy. It's also real time, which is insane. So, you could play with that workflow today and maybe figure out how it works. There's some other free workflows in here as well. So feel free to play around after class if you see anything you like that is available, like go ahead and open it and play with it and see if you can generate anything cool with it. The main thing we're going to do here is we're going to launch a machine. And you do that just at the top here. Their UI for all this stuff is pretty terrible. I don't know why. It's like the bread and butter of this company. But launch machine is the only way you can launch a machine. You can go to My Machines and you cannot actually launch a machine from here. So you have to go to the very top of the page and just hit launch machine. We won't do this just yet. I think we'll take a little break and then we'll come back and we'll get started into actually using Comfy. But just so you're aware, here are the prices for all these different systems. And I quite honestly have never used anything more than an XL. I don't know why you would need to. This would be insane to use 80 gigabytes of VRAM. There might be a model you need to do with that size, but basically like this is crazy cost. I wouldn't worry about this. For this class, you're going to be fine with a medium. Basically any static image generation, you'll likely be fine with a medium. There might be a case where like when we get to like using an IP adapter plus 3 control nets plus animate diff, where you need a large, which is 24 gigabytes of VRAM, but that's about it. And you'll see the costs here are $1 an hour for medium, $1.75 for large. And I would say, 60-40, 80-20, we're going to use a medium. So most of the case, you're going to spend $1 an hour to play with this tool. And that is not like, it's charged by the minute. So even if you say, I want to use it for an hour and you want to use it for 30 minutes, when you turn off your machine, you will only be charged for that amount of time. I think it's to the minute. It might be to like the 5 or 10 minutes. But I'm pretty sure that's true. And if you ever run into issues with RunComfy, there is a Discord. I know everyone is kind of hit or miss on Discords, but they have a support team that runs through Discord. And honestly, they've fixed a lot of issues for me very quickly. So it's pretty helpful in terms of support as well. You're not kind of stuck on your own. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but there's also a free version, which is CPU only. Because it can often take a lot of time to build a workflow or to upload models, they offer a couple 20 hours a month of CPU time, which is mostly if you need to upload like an 8 gigabyte model file, it might take an hour and a half. So they let you upload that for free. Then you turn off the machine, then you start a GPU machine to actually generate images. So they've kind of thought out some of this stuff in a nice way. But yeah, for the most part, we're going to use mediums, I think, for the next couple of weeks at least, if not the entire time. So hopefully, $1 an hour for this session plus a little bit of homework isn't too crazy for anyone. If it is, there might be other solutions, but I'll need to look into that. Yeah, so that's sort of the cost of RunComfy, and I really do think it saves you a lot of time and a lot of headaches, so it's kind of worth it. Like honestly, even when I'm playing with Comfy, like I will often just like at home, just like on the couch, pull up RunComfy and use it for an hour. And then when I find a workflow I like, I have a Linux box in my studio, and I'll like download the workflow and like run it through my own local system once I've got everything running. But it's kind of nice and lightweight, and you can just like get started without having to worry about stuff. Okay, so I think what we'll do is we'll take a little like 7-minute break. We'll come back at the hour mark. So everyone can get up, stretch a little bit, get a drink or of water or whatever. And then we come back, we'll rebuild that default workflow. So we'll just open up RunComfy and we'll get started with it. We'll just walk through what each one of those nodes does. I'll give a little brief overview into sort of how ComfyUI works. RunComfy has like some other added, I don't know, annoyances, or because it's running in a simulated environment, it's got some other things we have to worry about. What I might also say, actually, while we go on break, it takes about 3 to 5 minutes to start one of these machines. So what I would say is let's go ahead and launch one of these machines right now. So if you have your RunComfy account set up and you've got some credits set up, I would say let's launch a medium, and then we'll go on break, and then we come back. Hopefully by that time it's like open and running, because it does take about 3 to 5 minutes to run these. So I'm going to go ahead and hit launch here. When you hit launch, you then hit this current release. You can use older versions of these tools. This is especially important if you use Animate Diff. We don't need to worry about that today. We're just going to use the current release. So make sure that one's clicked and your current release. You'll hit next. And then you can set up a time. This is basically like a ceiling where it cuts off after a certain time, but you can always extend this time. So we're definitely going to use the next hour on this. So I'm going to set this to like an hour or 10 minutes just to use it for the rest of class. You can always extend it in the tool, but basically what happens is, like, let's say you like forget, you have to like walk the dog and you walk away and then you forget about this. It'll shut off after an hour and 10 minutes. So the most you get charged if you forget about this is, for me, 92 cents. For you, probably like $1.15. Because I'm paying for Pro, I get a slight discount on this. I use it enough that it's worth it. I'm not sure it was worth it for all of y'all, but if you want to, you can. And then you can add more funds if you run low. But pretty much this is it. We're going to hit launch. And it's going to ding when you're ready. It's a classic AI thing of when things are ready, you get a little like toaster bell ringing. You don't need to worry about this first time user must read kind of thing. I think there's probably like some terms of service in there, but don't worry about that. So yeah, let's take a break. Let's come back in like 6 or 7 minutes. So at the hour mark, and then we'll dive into actually using Comfy. Sound good? Cool. All right, see everybody in a couple minutes.
Thank you.
Yep. This always happens to me. I always forget after our break. So in future sessions, please remind me. Glad I remembered only 5 minutes in. We're just waiting on RunComfy to run because I think we've got too many people using it all at once and probably like overloading their system. Yours failed. Okay, so we're gonna see how this goes. Yeah. Okay, so I'm just gonna run mine through Colab. If that works better, I know some of you, I know like Sean's a Colab person, I know some other folks are. So like if it ends up being easier to do it this way, like I might just like send people this stuff, but it's gonna be kind of a headache for us in the future of trying to do all this. So there's a Comfy GitHub page, and I'll just run all this. Hopefully, like, if anything, at least I can show you how the tool works, then we can figure out what the better solution is for everybody. I don't need any of this stuff.
Derek, could you just explain what you mean by the relationship between Colab and Comfy? Are you able to use both the user interfaces at the same time?
So yeah, so great question. So Colab is a Jupyter notebook essentially in the cloud. So what we're going to do, or what I'm going to do if this works, is I'm going to use Colab's GPU, but use the ComfyUI front end to interact with everything. So what this will do is it'll give me a little tunneled GUI that I can then access and just use the Colab GPU behind the scenes.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Are you just doing that because the Google GPUs are easier for you to access, or faster, or cheaper? Or...
I'm doing it because there's a chance that we've crashed RunComfy completely, and I want to be able to show people how to do stuff today.
Okay.
So I mean, I do a lot in Colab. I have many courses and videos on using Colab if anyone's interested in that. Colab is, I mean, I would assume it's probably going to end up being cheaper than RunComfy, because Colab, you get access to nice GPUs for a fairly affordable price, because it's all Google stuff. So I just do a lot through Colab, and I just have a lot of credits built up, so I can like burn through stuff pretty quickly. So, all right, so Tiga is now working. So we've got like half the class with RunComfy open. I'm hoping that there's just like a little cascade of them waiting on everyone else's to open or to run. So we'll see. So Arshia is working. I know, Sean, I think you said you've got yours going. Okay, cool. So we're getting there. This is just my fail safe in case I can't get mine open. I can open it in Colab. It's going to be the exact same experience, minus one little detail. But I can share at a later date. I can explain some of that stuff.
Derek, have you found with teaching classes that when a large group of students all spin up RunComfy instances that RunComfy doesn't like it?
Yeah, I was just mentioning that I taught a similar session at ITP Camp in the fall, or a month ago, and there were 50 people using it, and like we got halfway through the class and then everything crashed. And I reached out to their support and they said, we don't know why it crashed. We don't think it was that many people. We just think it was something else happening. So yeah, I don't really know. I don't know. Maybe they don't want to admit that they can only run 30 systems at a time or whatever. But
okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry if that's redundant. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
See, I'm getting this. So I'm getting the same error message here. I'm getting some, for every reason, I'm not able to get into their system. So that's fine. I'll be able to still show you ComfyUI and how it all works through the Colab system. That way, hopefully, some people can get on and we'll figure out. I'll DM their support team again and try to figure out what's going on here. But maybe I can also switch to a bigger machine size. Let me try that too. Maybe they only have so many mediums available. So let me just skip right ahead to an XL and we'll see if this works better too. The joy of startup ecosystems. And so if anyone is interested, they do have a Colab notebook as well. Sean, maybe this is for you, maybe mostly. But you can run this directly through Colab as well. The downside here is I'm basically updating all their packages directly through this. It's pretty slow to upload all this stuff. See, I thought I was thinking ahead because it was like, okay, we're gonna go on break. Like, oh, we'll get this set up and then we'll come back and we'll jump right in. You never can account for all the problems you're gonna have here. Okay, Sarah's finally in. It'd be great if they just blocked me and everyone else was able to get into it. Someone is setting off the remaining fireworks in my neighborhood right now. Okay, while we wait, let me talk a little about what we're going to do. So we're going to rebuild the default workflow, which I mentioned before. It sounds kind of counterintuitive, but it's actually going to be really helpful for us to learn like the basic pipeline of how Stable Diffusion works, especially for text to image. So we'll be able to add in, like, we'll basically like show what a model loader looks like. We'll look at how to load models directly through RunComfy. We'll then the main thing we're gonna look at is probably the case sampler. The sampler is the main core tool for Stable Diffusion. And then we'll also look at how to just connect everything. I think it's helpful to understand a little bit about how all these tools work because under the hood, it's all code, right? Like each one of these nodes is essentially a function with inputs and outputs. But understanding why certain things need to connect in a certain way or why you would start with a default batch size of 512 by 512 is helpful to sort of understand. So we'll go through that. I'm going to wait till we got stuff open before we talk about this stuff. So let's just wait and see where we're at. No, oh my God, so slow. Okay. That's probably why I shouldn't be on a T4. Okay, we'll deal with this. Okay, I got my ding. Okay, so for whatever reason, there's probably only like 10 mediums available. So everyone got a medium except me. Luck of the draw. They want me to pay more, which is fine. Um, so your interface probably looks like this minus this thing on the left-hand side, right? Everyone has something that looks like Comfy. So this is what's called the sidebar tool. This is the video that I added. It's linked to from the syllabus. Jess, sorry, you're still waiting. Okay, well, hopefully we will get yours in a minute. So the sidebar tool is this cool little helpful tool. I sort of explained that in a video. We won't use it today, so don't worry about it. I'm actually just going to hide it. But if you are interested, I think it's a nice helpful tool, especially because keeping track of nodes is a nightmare. And with this tool, you can pin the nodes you want to keep or like keep in mind, which is quite helpful. So I'm just going to shut that so we don't have to worry about it. So ignore this thing on your side. So everything within this box here is Comfy. So everything that's kind of grayish color is Comfy. This blue thing over here is actually RunComfy's. This is their file system. So if you want to upload files or download files, you can do this through their file system. Because ComfyUI, I'm going to continue to say RunComfy and ComfyUI as like get mixed up. Because ComfyUI can get very bloated or very large and have a bunch of nodes everywhere. Usually what I do when I first open RunComfy is I just come up here and I hit this X folder. So it's a little folder with a little X icon, and you hit that. It just hides that file browser. 9 times out of 10, you don't need that file browser until you're ready to download something. So I just hit that just to give me a little bit bigger of a canvas space. As I mentioned, you'll see there's a counter up here. They'll tell you how large your GPU is, as well as how much time you have left. If you're like hitting 10 minutes, you're like, I need to keep using this. You just go ahead and click change, and then you can add more time to your counter, which is nice. So there's no like, you have to decide ahead of time how long you're going to run for it. I think you could even shorten this. You might even say like, oh, I'm only going to use this for another 30 minutes. You could turn it down. But I just kind of leave it at that. So if I know like, oh, I need another half hour, I'm just going to crank it up and hit change. And this will update. As I mentioned, the other thing is, if I just walk away from my computer, this would keep running for at least an hour and 28 minutes or for an hour and 28 minutes. And it would charge me for that time. When I know I'm done with it, you always want to hit stop. So stop, it'll say like, you sure you want to stop this? You hit okay. And that will actually turn off your machine. So any time that you have not accrued using this is not charged to you. It's still like sort of like, it's set up as like, this is the maximum amount of time. It will shut off at that time. But if I stop earlier, it's not going to charge me that time. So I do find often like I thought something would take me longer than it did, or I need to go run an errand. So I hit stop and then come back to it anytime. The other really nice thing about RunComfy is unlike, Sean, you probably know this through Colab. Anything that I save to these folder systems, like I upload a model or I save some files here, actually persists across new instances. So when I upload models here over the CPU, if I then go open it in a GPU, that model is still there, which is really, really nice because some of these models are like 10 gigabytes of files, and you don't want to go and have to do that every time you want to run the system. So RunComfy's done a good job of making some of the interface stuff work. Got some questions about how many GPUs they allot per user. But overall, like there's some nice stuff here. So I have a video that also explains how to upload models to Comfy, and that's linked to in the syllabus as well. We won't need to worry about that today because as we're going to find out, Comfy already has a bunch of models installed for us, and it's going to cover like 75% of our use cases. So that's kind of nice. I'm gonna go ahead and shut this again.
Storage does RunComfy give you? I mean,
I've yet to hit the limit, so I don't know. They don't tell me, and
part of your account, and it persists across uses, huh?
Yeah, I'm sure I can hit it at some point, and maybe we will as a group or something. But I've yet to hit it, and I mean, I've uploaded like 5 or 6 custom models that are 10 gigabytes a piece. I've made some longer videos here that are probably a couple a gigabyte or 2 of data. So I've yet to hit the limit, but that's not to say that I won't eventually hit it. And they'll probably tell me when I do, or they'll charge me more, or something will happen there. So yeah, so far so good. Okay, so this thing down here is sort of our little queuing system. I'll talk about queuing when we actually want to start to generate an image, but the only way to generate an image or to run this flow is to hit the button called queue prompt. Don't ask me why they say it's queue prompt and not like start or like run or whatever, but queue prompt is the name they decided on this. You can actually go ahead and hit this once now. Actually, let's do this. So hit queue prompt, and you'll see like, it's going to take a little bit of time as it like runs through this flow, but out of it, we will get an image. So queue prompt basically like starts the workflow. And you'll see here even that like it has a green box around the node that it's currently working in. So it will, take a little bit of time to load that checkpoint, and it's going to run through everything else. And then out of it, I will get this image. The reason it's called queuing is you can actually hit this multiple times. You can hit it 10 times, and it will run the workflow 10 times in a row. There is no real looping system within Comfy. Like there's no concept of like a loop where you could say like for, I equals 10, like whatever, like give me 100 iterations. You just have to hit the button 100 times, which is kind of annoying. There are ways around it, but they're all kind of janky. But queue prompt is basically the way to run the workflow. Another nice thing about Comfy is that it caches anything that needs to be cached. So because I've run this load checkpoint once, if I don't change this load checkpoint, it's not going to take another 15 seconds or 30 seconds, however long it took to load that checkpoint. If I hit this again, it's going to be much, much faster. In fact, it even skips these steps because it's already been loaded. So there are some really nice benefits to Comfy in the sense that you don't need to constantly like rerun stuff or learn how to cache things, that sort of thing. As I mentioned, this is the default workflow. If you ever end up in a place where like you accidentally like screw some things up and you're like, oh crap, I need to go back to the default, there's a button here that says load default. And now they say like, hey, are you sure you want to reload the load default workflow? You hit OK, and then you go back to your previous version. What we're going to do is we're going to build this from scratch. I'll cover a couple of these other buttons as we get further along in class. But for now, we can kind of just work off this. So we're going to rebuild this workflow from scratch, and I'm going to talk about each node as we go through it. So let's get started. So what we want to do here first, we're just going to clear our workspace. So we'll go ahead and hit the clear button. It's going to say, are you sure you want to do that? And we're going to hit OK. And now we have a blank workspace. 95 out of 100 times, you're never going to start with a blank workspace. But for this group, it's just kind of fun to start with blanks and work from there. 9 times out of 10, you're going to like start from like a previously workflow, someone else's workflow, or like something that you started with, or you're going to start from the default workflow and build off that. So you almost never start with a blank canvas. It's very rare you do this. So the way to add a node is to double click in your canvas space. So the little gridded space here. So if we double click, we then get this thing called search. Everything here is kind of laid on search, which makes it really hard because you need to know the name of the node you're looking for. This is like my least favorite part of ComfyUI is like, if you don't know the node you're looking for, it's really hard to find it. But I'm going to walk us through sort of like the basic workflow, which these will be the nodes you will likely use all the time. So you can start to get familiar with them, and or you can use the sidebar to start to pin the ones you like the most, or the ones you're going to use the most. So the first node we're going to look for is we're going to type in K sampler. You'll see in here a bunch pop up. Again, this is the other challenge of Comfy is like just figuring out which node you want to use. Most of the time, it's just like there is a hotkey to pull up search, but I don't remember what it is. Usually, I just double click in the space. So if you double click in your canvas, you can pull up this and then type in K sampler again, and we're going to drag this in. This actually happens to be the middle of our workflow. It seems counterintuitive to start with the middle of your workflow, but actually, I don't think if there's a single workflow where you aren't using a K sampler. K sampler is pretty much the diffusion process put into a single node. And I've got some slides. We'll talk about this in just a minute. But basically, we always want to start with a K sampler because there's just always a K sampler in every single workflow. Let's actually talk about a K sampler. So what is the K sampler right now? So the K sampler looks like this. We'll talk about what do these inputs need to be as we begin to build out our workflow. But the K sampler is like literally the most important node in all of ComfyUI. Like I don't know I've ever seen a single workflow that either doesn't use K sampler or K sampler advanced. We won't look at K sampler advanced today, but we might look at it in next week's session. It just adds a couple more parameters that we don't really need for today. But K sampler is basically the diffusion process built into a single node. So if you watch that diffusion video that I shared with everyone, that was like 30 minutes, that covers seeds, steps, what we call CFG, and then picking what sampler you want to use. And basically your homework for this week will be to actually just play with these values and see what you get out of it. But I'll talk a little bit about what these are. So the first thing is seed. So seed is, it's so hard to explain random seeds to people. If you've already used processing or P5, you know a random seed is like a placeholder for a random value, but it's not really a random value, right? It's like it generates the same randoms over and over again every time you run it. And that's really helpful for us because sometimes we might want to isolate our variables, meaning we only want to play with the steps configuration. And we want to always generate a similar looking image using a seed. So seed generates random noise. And remember that a diffusion model it always creates noise and then it turns noise into an image. It is a denoising process. And so the seed helps us figure out what our starting noise is. So again, I like to use fixed seeds as a way to sort of isolate variables and only play with certain parameters at a time. Comfy allows you to fix the seed, increment it, or fully randomize it. So let's take a look at this in Comfy real quick. So in Comfy, you'll see here that there is, you can pinch to zoom to find that. Let's see if I can get this. So here, clear X, cancel. I just want to clear out that feed at the bottom there. So you'll see here there's a value called seed. By default, the seed is always 0. And then there is a parameter after this called control after generate. So this means what should I do after this? When I hit Q prompt, what should I do with this? Should I randomize the seed value? Should I increment the seed value? Should I decrement the seed value, or should I keep it fixed at 0? By default, it's randomized. I think starting with fixed is kind of a nice thing. Just again, it isolates your variables. I don't know if it's actually going to do this. Let's see if this works. Yeah, so it's got no outputs. So it won't actually do this. Once we build out our workflow, we'll be able to see what randomized looks like. The thing to remember is this is always after generation. So you will see the seed that you're using in this exact moment, but then when you hit Q prompt, it'll generate a new seed. So if you're it's good to always make sure that you've set this to fixed if you care about the seed value, just so you know what you've got. Next, let's talk about steps. I'll skip. Okay, so steps determines how many iterations each image goes through to remove all the noise fully. Again, I'll show a little example of what this looks like. One of the challenges for steps is that steps can be determined by the model you're using. It can be determined by the sampler you're using, which we'll talk about samplers in just a minute. There's a lot of variables to figure out exactly what the right number of steps is. And honestly, a lot of people just sort of play with it until it works out the way they want it to. There's no hard and fast rule about how many steps you need for a certain thing. So remember, the way a diffusion model is trained is it's trained on a bunch of images and text pairs, and then it adds noise to those images. So basically learns to add noise to an image. And when it learns to do that, it can then also learn to do the inverse, which is taking a noisy image and converting that to an image that we as humans would recognize. Steps are essentially the number of leaps it makes in the denoising process. So if you were to go from pure noise to in one step to an image, the model wouldn't really know how to do that. It's too fast of a leap. It's like trying to learn calculus as a kindergartner, right? You don't have enough of the understanding to actually make that leap. You could try to do it in 4 steps, but again, it's now you've learned basic arithmetic and now you're being asked to learn physics or something, right? It's again, it's too many steps between the things. So usually you need anywhere between 10 and 30 steps. That's sort of the baseline that people shoot for, is do between 10 and 30 steps to get to a good image. We'll talk about samplers in a minute. That's a whole other conversation topic that gets very hairy, but it can be dependent on the sampler as well. Now, there are some new diffusion models that have come out in the past 6 months or so. Some of them are called lightning models, some of them are called LCM models. And the whole goal of those models is to achieve a high quality image in less steps. Steps take a certain amount of time, right? So we've been talking, I think, before class started, we were talking about sort of real-time tools with this stuff. A step takes a certain amount of time. And the more steps you have, the longer it takes, meaning you can't do real-time. So there are new models that are coming out that are trying to approach doing more real-time generation using less steps. Problem is, often the quality is kind of a problem there. So there's a lot of stuff coming out. I think in the future, we'll find that there will be ways to use less and less steps, meaning generation will be faster. But that's the steps parameter. So when we go to RunComfy, you'll see, sure enough, the steps ends up right in the middle between 10 and 30, right? So they chose some smart defaults. It's going to start with 20. CFG. Oh man, I don't even know. So CFG is our next parameter. It is a thing called classifier-free guidance. There are whole white papers written about how this works and how it helps things. This is basically text prompting. So CFG allows you to feed in a classifier-free, meaning there are no labels attached to these things, to generate an image. CFG, the score is sort of like you can lower the score, meaning you might get more image diversity, but you would get less adherence to the text prompt. So CFG scores tend to range between 2 and 12, so 2.0 and 12.0. And each model and each sampler will have slight differences in how CFG affects your scores. This is why diffusion models are so crazy, because there are so many parameters that it's hard to like say like, oh, in this exact example, you need these 10 parameters. Like every model and every text prompt you provide is going to need a slightly different CFG score. In some cases, with good models, like if you find a model on Civitai, they will often tell you like, oh, try with this CFG score using this sampler with this many steps. I get good results with that. So that's where the community can kind of help out with these things, because each one of these things is a little bit of a chaotic system to try to sort of manage them. We talked about steps already, so let's talk about samplers. So, and that's, if we look at this here, if we look inside of RunComfy, you'll see there's now a thing called sampler name. So CFG score, again, 8 tends to be the default that people start at. Sometimes you lower it, sometimes you make it higher. It's a bit of a guessing game, to be honest. But samplers are a really interesting thing. This is like, we're talking about denoising, right? But denoising is not just like a linear process. You don't always take away 5% of the noise at each step, or how you take away noise can change. So each one of these samplers has a different approach to denoising. Again, getting crazier and crazier. Like you could spend your entire life just trying to understand like just this node. And most people just sort of found like, oh, 9 times out of 10, Euler works better than anything else does, so stick with that. So that's actually why Euler is the default, because most people found that Euler is probably the best result. It gives you the best speed and accuracy of your image generation, but there are a million other, well, there's something like 20 other samplers you could use as well. For samplers, I would definitely recommend that you watch, there's this video by a guy, I think it's called Ron's Hobby Channel. Love YouTube people's names. Ron's Hobby Channel has a nice like 12-minute video on, he went through and looked at each sampler, and he kind of figured it out based on speed, quality, a couple other parameters on why Euler or a couple of these other ones are the best ones to use. He explains it way better than I could. One of the interesting things about some of these samplers is some of them do what we call converge, meaning from like step 5 through step 20, there's very, very little difference in the image generation. It just gets slightly better quality as it goes through it. Whereas other models or other samplers are what we call stochastic, which means as they denoise, they also add more noise back in, which means they tend to be more creative and they generate more diverse images, but they're also harder to control. So all of these things are kind of like this mix of like, you know, within all these parameters, you could spend 10 years just sort of exploring all the different parameters within these things. The other thing that's fun about samplers is you might need to change a CFG score based on your on what sampler you're using. So just to give you a heads up for a little bit of your homework, anything that is just a regular name without either underscore ancestral or underscore SDE is a convergence model, meaning it will, over time, the more steps you add, it'll just get a slightly finer details in your image. But at step 10, it will basically define the overall structure. Anything that has underscore ancestral or underscore SDE on it is a stochastic model, meaning it will change quite dramatically depending on how many steps you use. So the reason that this is important is for most people, their workflow is you start with a low number of steps, you generate your base image, you pick from 100 images and you find your favorite seed, and then you crank up the steps to get a higher quality image. The problem is if you try to do that with with these stochastic models, you will never get the same image. So most people avoid those stochastic models because it doesn't allow for that sort of nice workflow of generate a lot of images fast, pick your favorite, and then improve it. which probably means there's actually a lot of cool stuff that could be done with stochastic images that most people in the community avoid because it doesn't match a sort of consistent workflow that people use. So I actually will play with Euler Ancestral quite frequently, and I do find it gives really good, interesting results. The problem is hard to replicate because of that steps and stochasticity issue. So all I have to say, your homework's gonna be to play with some of these things. So like have fun and like just mess around and see if you can figure out what works for you or what doesn't. But it is kind of, there's a lot here. Oh, there's also this thing called scheduler, which I didn't even make a slide for. Scheduler is basically like, schedulers are the normal is linear, right? So if you give it 20 steps, it's going to remove 5% of noise at every step. There's other ones that are exponential, which you can imagine are removing less noise at the earlier steps and then much more noise at the end steps. There's Keras, there's a couple other ones. There's even one you have to use for the LCM models, which are faster, but you have to use their scheduler for it to work. We'll cover that more when we get into LCM models, because we're going to use those for animations. So that's just one node. This happens to be the most complex node, but it is like the heartbeat of any diffusion tool is basically this K-sampler node. So basically you're going to build up everything else, but mostly what you're going to do is play with this, all the little variables within this and all the parameters within this. And that makes it cool and it makes it fun. And honestly, I feel like you develop a little bit of intuitive sense with these things once you get a little bit further along. Like you make an image and you're like, oh, that's too crisp. It's like overly sharpened. Then you turn your CFG down or you reduce the number of steps. Like you can kind of sort of feel out like the machine and figure out what it wants to do based on your outputs. So that's that node. Let's go back and start to build out the rest of this because once we start to generate images, we'll be able to talk about this a bit more. So we have a bunch of inputs here. So now what we basically want to do is we want to work backwards from our K-sampler into building out our system. And there are sort of two ways to build out nodes from here. One, we can just sort of we can like do the same thing. We double click and search for the node we know we want. The thing that is kind of helpful to do here as well is also to just click on the input circle, drag it out, and then release. And it's going to sort of say like add node. And actually this is, I think you release with control. Nope, release with option. Release with command. Where is this? Release with shift. There we go. That's what I wanted. Okay, so I don't do this very often, as you can tell. So if you drag this out and then release with shift, it's actually going to recommend what it thinks are the most popular or the most likely nodes that you need to connect to. I've sort of memorized the nodes I need, so I like just search for them because sometimes it does give you bad results. But if you drag out the model and you hit shift and then you release, you'll see, I want to make this a little bit easier to show it on screen. Its default input is a load checkpoint. So let's click that on that. So we get a load checkpoint. This is our model loader. This is where, if you've heard of Stable Diffusion XL, Stable Diffusion 1.5, Stable Diffusion 2, maybe you've heard of some of the other crazier Civitai models, like Photo Orgasm or whatever. I think it's like Orgasmic Realism, something like that. All the names of these things. This is how you load in that model. So if I click on this, you'll see RunComfy. You might not have every one of these, but you'll have many, many of these. RunComfy comes pre-installed. Epic Photogasm, that's the one I was thinking of. RunComfy comes with about 25 models pre-installed. And each one of these models is probably like 10 gigabytes. So not having to install those all yourself is a huge help. Now, I don't think most of us will use all these, but if we wanted to, we could. If we just want to use the default Stable Diffusion 1.5 model, that is called, I think it's all the way here at the bottom here. Do folks have one that is called, see how long this list is? V1.5-prune-EMA only.ckpt. Do you guys have that one? Okay, cool. So let's select that one. That is Stable Diffusion 1.5. We can skip why it's called pruned EMA only for now, but just know that's Stable Diffusion 1.5. 9 times out of 10, let's say 6 times out of 10, that's the one you want to use to start with at least. So you can select that one. So a checkpoint actually comes with a bunch of models inside of it. It comes with what we call the UNet model, which is the actual model that helps us generate the image. It also comes with a clip model, and it comes with a VAE model. Clip model is going to help us actually do the text prompting, and a VAE is how it helps us. We're getting decoding. Basically, the main UNet model just provides a small image, and then the VAE decoder essentially turns it into an image for us. So a model will generate a bunch of like ones and zeros or little pixels for us, and the VAE actually turns that into an image. So you could load each one of these individually. We won't do that today because it's a whole other thing. But there are people that load the 1.5 model using a special VAE with a special clip loader. Like you can sort of break these out into their own thing. You could just double click here and go load, and you'll see load VAE. So if I wanted to replace the VAE from this model, I could use its own separate loader. Let's see, load clip. If I have my own clip model I want to load in. So there are a bunch of nodes here to load in your own versions of these things. Most people just use the default built-in for each model. It tends to be safer. You know they're made for that. There's a bunch of problems here where if you disconnect different models with the wrong node, you get a bunch of other issues. Let's talk really quickly about models. If you've never played with Stable Diffusion, you might not know what each one of these models means or what their pros and cons are. So I've got a couple slides here just on how models work, or the main model types. So the thing to remember is each model will kind of have its own pros and cons. You might think like, oh, let me just use whatever the latest Stable Diffusion model is. But I can tell you, most of the Stable Diffusion community hates the latest models, and they all love 1.5. Partly that's because 1.5 was trained on a bunch of unsafe imagery, let's say, trained on pornography, trained on all sorts of other things. And that community tends to love that stuff. So they still want 1.5 because it's got all the dirty images in it. Whereas Stable Diffusion 3 is like kind of hated by the community right now because they did a bunch of stuff to sort of make it safer, which you could argue is good. But a lot of people complain that it hurts image generation and other things. So you might think like just grab the latest version and that's great, but like most people will tell you that's not how you want to work. I could go into a whole discussion about how weird the Stable Diffusion community is, but I will say there is still some value. Like I would say I don't believe that they are right about the pornography side of things, but they are right about other parts of these older models, and that they were trained on a much more diverse set of data, and therefore they can sometimes generate better diversity in terms of images. So when we get further into class, it's actually really important that we know what our base model is, because as we begin to add other models on top of this, they have to connect. So 1.5 model has to use a 1.5 animate diff model. A SDXL model has to use an SDXL control net model. So when we get further into class, we're going to need to know what our bases are in order to connect them to the right models. Otherwise, they'll break, they'll do weird stuff, we'll get black images, whatever. So a couple of the key models to know about that people tend to use a lot. Stable Diffusion 1.5, as I mentioned, was like the one that was sort of trained on the most open data set. And quite honestly, it's still the one that a lot of people use today because of that diversity. It's also the fastest. It was trained on images that are 512 by 512, and therefore it can generate images at that size relatively easily. There's a downside of this, which is that the way that particular model was trained is it really likes producing square images. It doesn't do a great job of producing non-square images. And also when we get to animations, all of the animate diff models that exist out there largely are meant to work with 1.5. So even with animation stuff, which you would think is like the furthest ahead right now, we actually still have to use the oldest base model in order to get all those functionalities. Some of that has to do with like, when animate diff came out 6 months ago, it took them a year to do all the research. So the only thing they had available then was 1.5. So we're kind of stuck in that world. They are now training new models on SDXL. Who knows if it's going to work better or that sort of thing. So there's just a bunch of challenges with this stuff. SD 1.5 is generally the one people are going to start with because it's fast and a lot of other stuff works with it. SDXL, I think, came out about a year ago, maybe 9 months now. It's newer and it's a larger model. And by larger, I mean both in size, parameter size, but also in image generation size. It was trained at 1024 by 1024, meaning it's much, much bigger, double the size, which for artists or image generators is important. It was also trained to better work at different scale or different proportions. So you'll get better results if you try to train a 16 by 9 format image using SDXL. Which has to do with the architecture, the way they built it. SD 1.5 models, if you find them on Civitai, are like 2 gigabytes. An SDXL model is like 7 gigabytes. So even the file size is like massive compared to these. There are a bunch of other models that work with SDXL, but not all of them are as good as the others. So I know the IP adapter folks don't really like their SDXL model that they built, but it does work. The control nets, there are less control nets available for SDXL, and there's only one animate diff model that it works for SDXL, and it's more or less like they just label it as like, work in progress. So we probably actually won't use SDXL much in this class because we're going to jump and use some of these other tools. But just know SDXL is like a really, really well-known model, and people who just do pure image generation with it do tend to like it. SD3 is the newest SD model. It came out 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, something like that. There's been a ton of criticism about it. As I mentioned, the way they rolled it out is a little weird. They rolled out like a smaller version, and they realized the smaller version was crap. They rolled out a medium version, and people complained about the medium version, and it turned out that the way they built it, they went in and snipped out some pieces to make it safer. I think it's actually why the Comfy guy quit, weirdly enough. So people are still sort of on the fence about the SD3 model. The other problem with the SD3 model is their first license release said you couldn't use it for commercial work without paying Stability AI themselves. So people are freaked out about that. They're like, well, if I can't do commercial work with this, why would I use this thing? They've now rolled that back a little bit, but now it's caused confusion in the community about like whether or not they can use it or not. So in fact, Civitai, which is this community site that allows you to upload models, has banned people uploading SD3 models up there because no one understands the license yet. Pure open source, the fun of open source tech work. So I'd say SD3 is people still trying to figure out what they can use it for and how to use it. And it's only been out for 3 weeks, 4 weeks. So people are still trying to figure out like what it's good at, what it's not good at. So most people are kind of skipping that one. And there are no, I think I've only seen, I think there's a new control net model for it, but there are no other models that work with it, which is really hampering the system, to be honest. I think Golan put a note in our chat. There is this site called civitai.com. It used to be civit.ai. What do I say about Civitai? So Civitai is a wonderful community where there are lots of lots of models available to you. All of them have been trained on young women and young anime images. So I apologize if you go and visit that site and it looks creepy as hell, because it is creepy as hell. There are, however, some good models on that site. Most of them have already been downloaded and installed in RunComfy, so you don't need to go visit this horrible looking pedo site. I don't even know how to describe it. It is messy. There are lots of people who want to generate, half naked 18-year-old women using these tools. And that's what a lot of this site services.
The thing I would say is that
go ahead, yeah.
It's not only that the models, it's not that the models were trained on only images of women. It's that they could have a model for generating fruit, but they'll demonstrate it by generating a young woman. And
yes,
that's where it's really a cultural choice about how they're representing this. It makes it difficult for me to like show that to my students without a lot of apology.
As you see here, this is exact. Before I even open the site for anyone, I'm gonna apologize about what you're gonna see, because it is a real challenge, and it is one of my least favorite parts of this sort of open source community. Is they do default to showing you how young women are generated, and like you said, it might be generated on fruit, it might be generated on images of things that are like darker images, like at midnight, or like dusk like images, but then they show only women as their main images. And again, I don't know why the community decided that was that. I mean, I have some thoughts, but like, yeah, it is hard to go to that site. There are some filters. I should also say, like, you can preset filters to filter out sort of not safe for work content. And I would recommend that. Like, you'll see that when I open mine, mine looks pretty good because I've already set those filters. There's a filtering system here that you can turn it off. Oh God, I'm gonna do it and hope that this doesn't like backfire on me. Okay, so far so good. But yeah, there's definitely some issues with the site. But if you go to models and you go to base model, okay, you will see lots of women, but at least they all have clothes on, so that's good. Oh, there's a guy without a shirt on. That's nice. Some diversity here. So there are a number of models here that you can then download. And I do have a recording on how to download one of these and upload it. So if you are interested in that, like, there's a recording on that. 9 times out of 10, for most of what's on RunComfy, like, you're gonna be fine. Unless you need a very specific model, like you really want this model, which I think maybe does like skulls or something, then you could download this model, upload it to RunComfy and use it. But for our usage, most of the time, we're not going to need those models. Like it's going to give us the base models in RunComfy by default, which is really most of what you need. Unless you're really going to look for a very specific look. Even if you want like photorealistic, then you've got that photogasm one. Yeah, epic photogasm. So you can also like most of these models that are not the traditional SD 1.5 SDXL, you can look them up on Civitai and they'll be there. So for example, we can look up comic diffusion. I'm sure comic diffusion is on here. So I can go up here and search comic diffusion. And here is the model. The other nice thing about this is a lot of the times, not this one though, you will also see that people have different flavors of this model. They've got like for Juggernaut, for example, let me show that one as an example. That's a popular one that lots of people use. There is an SD 1.5 version of Juggernaut. There is a XL model of Juggernaut. There are other things that are Juggernaut based that are other tools you can build on top of. So the other nice thing is if you know I need an SD 1.5 workflow, because you're going to use the animate diff or whatever, a lot of times these custom models have also been trained on both sizes, both flavors, which is nice. So I go to RunComfy and I look for Juggernaut. There's also a filtering system up here, so you could just type in Juggernaut. I can see that there's a bunch of SDXL versions, and then there's probably a version that I uploaded, which is just the SD 1.5 version. So if you wanted a Juggernaut as an SD 1.5, you could either download it, upload it yourself, that sort of thing. So that is checkpoints. These are what I would describe as base models. I think checkpoints is kind of a tricky term because there are other models that use the checkpoint extension, so it gets confusing. This is basically what I would describe as like your base image generation model. This is the model that allows you to generate any image using this tool. Okay, so we've only covered 2 nodes here. I'm going to quickly go through the rest of them. The rest of them are actually quite simple. So we know that we're going to be doing some text prompting, right? So we need to be able to figure out like what our text prompt is. So from either direction, you can kind of build this up. So either from the clip version, I could add our text prompt model or text prompt node, or from our positive and negative nodes, I could provide this. I'm going to do it from the positive. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the positive circle here, drag it out, hit shift, and then depress. And you'll see that its first recommendation is the clip text encode, which is a prompt. So we'll select that. Let's zoom out, give ourselves a little bit of space here. So you have our prompt. This will take in a piece of text. You'll see there's a positive and a negative. If you use a tool like Midjourney or maybe, I don't know, like a basic Stable Diffusion tool, not a lot of tools actually offer negative prompting, but negative prompting is by default expected in these tools. So we can drag out a negative as well. So let's click on this circle here, drag it out, hit shift, unclick, and we'll add another clip text encode. This can confuse people.
Expected, you mean that we have to have one?
No, it's not required, but it is largely expected. There are often ways, even as we go through this, we'll look at things where it's easy to generate a negative in addition to your positive. And it does improve the quality of your image generation as well. So I would say almost always you should also include a negative prompt. Maybe next week I'll talk a little bit more about prompt engineering and how to approach a negative prompt. I take a different stance than other people who like immediately put in a bunch of stuff into the negative prompt. I actually tend to prompt positive, and then anything I want to remove from that image, I add to the negative prompts. But that's sort of my approach. Other people have different approaches. The other thing I should say is, if you look at this, it can be confusing about which one is your positive and which one is your negative without having to look at the nodes. And when you build up stuff and you get a whole bunch of stuff around here, it can be hard to figure out which is positive and which is negative. A very common convention is if you click on the top node and you right click, you can go down to colors and you click your little caret here. You can then select a color. Most people will select green for their positive prompt, and they will select red for their negative prompt. This way, it's easier to sort of visually tell what's the positive and what's the negative, right? So in this one, let's just go in. I'm just going to add, this is my classic go-to, a dog riding a dolphin. I'm not going to leave the negative empty for now. But one thing I should do, I don't need to do it with this prompt because it's not really an issue. But if you prompt with positive with people, often the first thing you want to do is add not safe for work or nude into your negative prompts. That way you don't get nude people. I mean, unless you want nude people. But since this is going to go up on YouTube, I don't want nude people because I'll get demonetized for that. So I'm going to just add that in. I don't really need it with this prompt. I know that because I've done this a bunch. But just in case, we'll leave that in there. Okay, so now we have built up, well, actually, we've connected our conditioning nodes to our positive and negative conditioning nodes. But the problem is we actually need these to connect these to our clip model, right? So see that these two are yellow, and you'll see that from our model, we also have a yellow output node. So what we need to do is we need to connect our clip output to our clip input here and here. I'm not entirely sure why they change colors and why it switches from clip to conditioning. It's all kind of the same thing. But because this is yellow to yellow, it helps you know, like you connect this to this, and it converts it to an orange output for conditioning. We'll look at some other ways to do conditioning next week, because there are more stuff you add to this. But for now, we've got so now we're using, we're bringing in our positive and negative prompts into our K-sampler. There's one last thing we need from our K-sampler, which is this thing called latent image. Latent image is basically like the parameters for the image size and dimensions, essentially. So what we can do here is we can grab this, hold down Shift and release, and you'll see it wants to give us another K-sampler, wants to give us a VAE encode, and it wants to give us whatever. What we actually want in this case is an empty latent image. So we click on an empty latent image, and we see the defaults are 512 by 512 and a batch size of 1. So what is this? This is basically us telling the model what size we want our images to be. So in this case, we want the height and the width of our image to be 512 by 512. That's good because that's what SD 1.5 is trained on. And that's the model we're using here, right? So we're basically saying like, hey, give me a 512 by 512 image. And then batch size, we'll talk about batch size in a second. Batch size is how many images it should generate. In this case, I only want 1, right? So we're going to leave this as this. So at this point, our K-sampler input is now filled up. The last thing we need to do is look at our latent here. And this is our output of our model. So remember, the diffusion process will create it's not even really an image, it's like a placeholder with 512 dimensions on the height and the width. So we need to convert that placeholder to an actual image. And we do that using what's called the decode node. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to click on our latent output, hold down Shift and unclick, and you'll see that what we get here is a VAE decode. So click that, and you'll see that with this, we have a red input node that connects to a VAE. VAE is a variational autoencoder. You can basically think about it as a decompressor. There is, on one side of a VAE is an encoder, meaning it makes something smaller, and then on the other side is a decompressor or a decoder. So the VAE is, the K-sampler technically produces the encoded smaller version, and we need to uncompress it to make our image. But we also need a model attached with this. So you'll notice over here on our load checkpoint, we have a red node or red output, right? And that connects to our VAE decoder. So now the decode is being fed in the right model, and it's being fed in a latent out of the K-sampler. And now we just need to create our image. So the last thing we want to do here is we're going to drag out our image. There are 2 different image nodes that you could use here. And actually, let's just do this. So let's click on the image node and drag it out, and then hit Shift, and then unclick. And you'll see there are 2 main ones that I would sort of think about. One is save image, and one is preview image. As you can guess, one is just going to preview the image in your Comfy workflow space for you. The other is actually going to save your image to the RunComfy system, to your file system. If you're running this locally, this will save this to wherever you determine it to be on your file system. Usually there is a folder in RunComfy called outputs. That's just the default place everything is dumped. So I'm going to add a save image. So I'll do this. I'll click and drag and then hit Shift, and then we'll hit save image. And there's not really much to do with this one. All you can do is give it a file prefix name. There are other nodes that allow you like to do more fun dynamic sort of naming systems, that sort of thing. This just basically says, how do you want me to save this file? In this case, you can do something like, let's go week1 / comfy default. What this will do is it'll create a folder called week1, and then it will save a file in here called comfy default with like an incremented file number. So it might go like comfy default 0000000.png. I think it saves it as PNG. I think they're PNGs, maybe a JPEG, I don't know. Again, there are other nodes that will actually give you more of that functionality to save out certain file types, like that sort of thing. But the default of the save image, I think, does a JPEG. I'm thinking about that now. Okay. So we have basically now rebuilt the default workflow. We spent a lot of time talking about case samplers and we spent a lot of time talking about models, but we're basically done here now. We're ready to run this finally after like half an hour. So we can go over here and hit Q prompt. And you'll see it creates a green box around our checkpoint. Usually takes the longest to load checkpoints because they're massive files. So this might take like 30 seconds to load. And then it's going to quickly move through all of these steps. The case sampler might also take a little bit of time because we are asking for 20 steps. Didn't take that long though. And out comes my image. And you'll see, wow, that doesn't really look like a dog riding a dolphin at all. It just looks like a dolphin. And we'll get into text prompting and everything next week. The reason I actually like using this text prompt is because it's very hard to actually generate a good image like this. Most models don't do a good job of this. And that's because data sets don't often have dogs riding dolphins. So you can kind of see how well it does with diversity. We could try changing our seed and seeing if that produces a better image. So let's change our seed to any other random value. We'll do 100. We'll hit Q prompt again. And I still don't get a dog riding a dolphin, but I get a dolphin. Maybe let's try cranking up the CFG score. So CFG, the higher the score is, the more it's supposed to align to the text prompt. The lower it is, the less it's supposed to align to the text prompt or adhere to it. So we can try setting this to 12, and let's run this again. And now I get 2 dolphins, not 1 dolphin. So clearly this model is not the best for this prompt. That's okay. Actually, I wonder if I remove this, if I get better results. There we go. This is why I don't add negative text prompts initially, because quite often negative text prompts actually influence the model into a certain direction that you don't want. I tend to use negatives as once I've got my image, I want to remove something from it. So maybe I want to remove trees. So let's type in trees, hit Q prompt. And wow, now I've got a person there. But my trees didn't disappear. So there you go. That's some of the challenge of these tools. Let's go back to this. And now I should, because I've gone back to the exact same prompt, the exact same seed, the exact same values, I should get back that exact same image before. Let's see. There it is. Okay. But if I change my parameters here, like let's say I go to Euler Ancestral and run this, I'll get a different image. This is where something like if you just want to generate new images to see how well your text prompt is working, you could set this to randomize and then just hit this, 10 times. And it's going to show you different images. You can switch it back to Euler. Let's see if we get more dogs here. Interesting. Only seed 100 worked out. All the other seeds do not generate dogs. There you go. So this is basically all we need to do for this week. We've learned a little about the Comfy workflow. We've learned a little bit about nodes. Every time you open RunComfy, you'll get this default. So like you can just play with this. Your homework for the week is basically to essentially play with either models or play with the case sampler. So go in and try a different weird sampler, or try changing the scheduling, or try cranking up the steps. Just play with stuff and sort of see if you get different results. Cool. I still can't get a dog. Only seed 100 has a dog in it. Or you could try changing your model. So we could do SDXL, and we could try, where's the default SDXL model? Maybe it doesn't have the default in here. All right, let's try Juggernaut. So the thing to know is that because we changed our model, the first time we run this is going to be a little bit slower because it doesn't have the same model cached. So this is going to take like, I don't know, 30 seconds. What happened here? Let's see. Juggernaut. Did I use the wrong one? Juggernaut XL. Let's try this one. Try a different model here. I should see a green box around this. I don't know what's going on right now. Back to this one. Sometimes if things don't work, you just hit restart Comfy, and you just refresh the machine. Well, let's see what happened here. This was also something that happened toward the end of our ITP camp session, which means maybe something is broken here. Let's see, load default. That's annoying. Okay, well, hopefully with your machine, you can change out the model and it'll run fine. Last thing I want to mention, I know we're over time at this point, is if you want to download your images, the way to do that is you probably have closed your folder. So if you click on the folder icon here, you'll open this, and you'll see a folder browser that is just opened with ComfyUI. You double click into here, and you'll see there's a thing called outputs. And I saved mine into week 1. Oh, and it looks like they do save out with PNGs. Cool. So if I want to download one of these, you could just click on this file, then go to the kebab menu up here, and you hit download, and then you says where do you want to download that, and you will download the file. There you go. So your homework is to just play around with schedulers and models and that sort of thing, and then download your files and share them over Slack. So this week will be pretty light. Many of you have probably already done this in Comfy, so it might be a little bit of a rehash. Yeah, thanks, Arsh. Okay, cool. I'm glad people are already uploading images. Thank you. Add those to Slack too, so people in the async class can see them as well. I'll start a little thread tonight where people can share images. But yeah, cool. I'm glad that people are making images and that sort of thing. Oh, so Sam asked, can you explain how it picks an image to generate if you leave the text prompts empty? Sure. If you leave a text prompt empty, you're just going to generate noise, and it's going to sort of figure out what to it's going to figure out something to generate, right? That decoder encoder tool is going to generate something. There actually are ways when we look at IP adapters to generate things using an image prompt rather than using a text prompt. And basically all that's doing is generating sort of the numeric system that a latent is looking for and moving the image toward those numeric systems. So there are ways to do that sort of thing, and we'll look at that in a couple weeks. Yeah, cool. I'm glad people are uploading stuff. Awesome. Oh, Garrett, is this a dog dolphin? That looks like a dog. Yeah, perfect.
2D line drawing was the hack there, if you can call it that.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. I didn't know if you used a different model or if that was a text prompt. Yeah. Okay, so some people are arguing dogs and dolphins. Again, I'm the cursed one this week, where apparently I can't get RunComfy to run. I can't get images to generate. I can't choose my models. So I don't know. Maybe they just hate me this week.
To be fair, this is a stable diffusion 3 that you
Stable
have.
Diffusion 3. Okay, great. Okay, cool. Yeah, maybe Stable Diffusion 3 has maybe the stability people have seen enough of my demos that they know like we gotta nail dogs and dolphins. I don't think any of them will watch my videos, but it's okay. Cool. So that's it for this week. We're only 5 minutes over, which is great. So I did an okay job of figuring stuff out with all the other issues with RunComfy. If you do run into RunComfy issues this week, let me know. I'd love to bug them and sort of be like, hey guys, I'm trying to teach on your tool, and I think lots of people would like this, but you guys got to fix some shit. So if you do run into issues, let me know, and I'll just bug them a bunch. I've talked to them a bunch through their support system, so I can kind of figure out what's going on there. And if you find RunComfy unusable, let me know about that too, and then I can also maybe we can look at some other options. I hope it works. It's like pretty good for me, but I guess obviously today in live demos I'm running into issues, but yeah. Perfect. So, and for this group, there is a Q&A at this time next Thursday as well. So if you do run into issues and you want help or anything, like the first week might not be a lot, but just because people might be getting set up. Usually what I'll do is in our live channel, I'll post a little poll just saying like, hey, does anyone want to come through and ask questions? If you think you're going to come through, please say yes, because if no one is going to come through and no one responds to me, I might just cancel the session. Or I'll be like, hey, do we want to reschedule for a different time? So if you do want help or you do want to ask about questions or honestly about anything related to Comfy or Stable, like please let me know. And if you know what your question is ahead of time, also let me know what that is, because sometimes I need to do a little bit of research before I can answer that. So if you have a certain question in mind, like just drop that in the channel and I can do some research before we meet up on Thursday.
Hi, Derek. A quick question. Do you know how to save the workflow on Comfy?
Yes, great question. I don't know if it's going to work for me here because shit's broken. But the save button here, if you hit save, it's going to say, where do you want to save your workflow? Or what do you want to call it? And you can just say like my workflow. And if you spell my workflow correctly, that's good. My workflow. You hit OK. It's going to download the file for you. I think my RunComfy is borked, but it should give you a download option for you there. Now for us, because we just rebuilt the default, we don't really need to save that. If you want to save it for yourself, you're more than welcome to. But as we begin in later classes, I will save out all the workflows that we do every week, so that you can then I'll make an archive of them so everyone has access to them. Cool. All right, that's it for this week. I'll see some of you on Thursday, I hope, and then we'll catch up again on Monday.
Thank you so much, Derek. That was great.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
everybody.
Thanks, Derek.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Derek. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.